I started at DuPont in the early 2000s. So I was working in Atlanta at the time and at a radio station. I was a promotions and marketing director for a bunch of radio stations here in Atlanta. And I took my own personal vacation. I went down to the Amelia Island Auto Show because I was still a car guy. I went to the DuPont booth and introduced myself to the guys and just said, "Hey, I love your magazine. Been reading it since I was a kid, as we all do." As I'm talking to Steve Chapman and Clint Sly was there at the time and Tom and come to find out that some of the higher ups were involved at radio earlier in their career as well. So they had owned radio stations, they had managed radio stations, so they knew my skill set as a promotions and marketing director. They kind of had a better idea of what my skill set was than most other industries had. And I knew that DuPont's corporate offices were based in Clearwater at the time, which is where I had grown up. And I was kind of looking to get back to Tampa. So talking to them, they're like, we really need somebody to help us with our events, and we want to do more with these special events. And so we kept in touch and started talking. And they eventually talked me into moving back and coming to come work for them. So one of the things that we had talked about is how they could capitalize the auto show and do more with it. They had done in the past their normal, I'm going to put a booth out and give out magazines and stuff like that. And I said, I said, well, we have all these resources, we have all these cars here, we have all these other things. Let's do like $1 million, row, a big display. And the auto show loved the idea. They could promote it. We start calling in favors, and Spiker sent over 007, one of their first cars that were out there. And we started getting phone calls and started calling people. And next thing you know, the sales guys had reached out to a lot of their clients. And we end up with this collection of supercars that nobody had ever seen before. We had, from a local collector, Don Wallace had brought out his McLaren F1, which was gorgeous. He also brought out Enzo number 400, which was the one that was gifted to the Vatican, and the Pope signed and was then auctioned off for charity. We had the first Rolls-Royce Phantom that was cut in half and turned into a limo. Once we get there and start getting set up, we ended up with a Carrera GT. The Mercedes dealer locally comes to us and says, "Hey, listen, we didn't know the McLaren SLR was going to be there. We don't have room for it in our booth. We don't have anywhere, the auto show thought it would go great here." I'm like, "Yeah, put it in the collection." And then we find out that the Koenigsegg is coming. This is before anybody had seen it. They had only at the CC8S. They hadn't even gone to the CCR yet. This is like, smuggled in gray market, and they were prospecting dealers at the time. So the guy that managed it was in Lighthouse Point in South Florida. And we found out that he was going to bring it up, but he's like, he was on his way. And I was like, the show opens tomorrow. He's like, the show is willing to stay open late and say, look, if you can get it in tonight, whatever time it is, the security will let you in. He ends up showing up to the Tampa Convention Center about 2 a.m. He's exhausted. We're exhausted. We're all set and ready to go. Security's in place to get the car in the middle of the night. He goes and he's like, he left the keys to the trailer, which was locked with a huge safety deadbolt. Couldn't get into the trailer, couldn't get the car out. So it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We're trying to figure out how do we unlock this thing. And so I end up at Home Depot buying die grinders and angle grinders and sawzalls, but anything we could think of to try and cut these locks open. So it's like at this point, it's 3:30 in the morning. We're grinding locks off and we get the car in. But the lineup that we had at the auto show, nobody had ever seen these cars before, especially not in one place. I mean, when you're talking Phantom, McLaren F1, Spiker, Koenigsegg, SLR, Carrera GT, I mean, these were the top cars, and nobody had put them together. None of the auto shows, none of the big boys, certainly not at what considered like a B-level auto show, the Tampa Auto Show. So that kind of springboarded DuPont's whole, special events and their presence at all of the auto shows. Auto shows were a big thing, and because the Tampa Auto Show was our home auto show, I guess you could say, because with DuPont Registry being based there in Clearwater. So we really pulled out all the punches for the Tampa Auto Show because they liked us there and they let us do whatever we wanted. Well, one year they wanted us to bring some cars out on display, and we had a couple of really cool things, but Steve Chapman at the time was living next to Hulk Hogan, and Hulk had his Viper that he never used. Because Steve Chapman and Hulk Hogan kind of lived next to each other, we ended up getting to see Nick Hogan in his early stages, and Brooke as well. They had given Nick a Hummer golf cart. The area that they lived, there was a private golf course there as well, and I guess Nick had kind of made a name for himself driving the Hummer around, so I was going to meet them to pick up the Viper. I had Nick's cell phone number, and I go to the house, and nobody's there. So I call Nick. I was like, "Hey man, I thought we were meeting here. I'm supposed to pick up the Viper. We got everything. We're set and ready to go." He's like, "Hey," he's like, "Where are you?" I was like, "I'm at your house." I was like, "And you're not here." He goes, "Can you come to the golf course?" I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" He goes, "I need you to come pick me up." I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I'll come pick you up, whatever." So I had a Forerunner at the time, and I pull up into the golf course, and there's cops everywhere. I'm like, what is going on? So I pull up, and I see Nick, and I call him. He's like, yeah. He's like, we're over there. So I walk in through the cops, and I was like, dude, what's going on? He goes, I broke the golf cart. I'm like, you broke the golf cart. So, and I look over and I see the Hummer golf cart is sitting in a sand trap. Him and some friends were jumping the golf cart. They called the cops on him. And as he's running from the cops to try and get home, he jumps one last sand trap and breaks the battery terminal off on the golf cart, dead stop. So the cops talked to him. They knew who he was. They couldn't get a hold of his dad. I guess that he was out of town or something like that. So I tell the cops, look, let me tow it back. I'll get them home. So I had a tow strap in my thing. So here I am. I'm driving my Forerunner on this private golf course, and we strapped the Hummer to it, and I pull it back, and I had to tow him all the way home back in front of all of his neighbors, in front of everything, with cops escorting us back, a whole fleet of them. And we pull into his house. We get the Hummer placed back, and all the cops are like, don't make us come back here again. Like, please don't. That was the early stages of Nick Hogan and him causing trouble at the golf course. But so we go to pick the Viper up from him and asked him if we could use it for the auto show. And it's an interesting, if you ever get to see Hulk Hogan's Viper, the seat has been completely disassembled. There's no moving the seat at all. It's bolted down and back as far as you can go for him. And he still sits with his head above. But for the regular people to drive it, they made a custom 3-inch foam insert that looked exactly like the seat and velcroed onto the seat so that you could, essentially a foam phone book, so you could reach the pedals. We spent half a day charging the battery and getting the car running, and we got it to the auto show. And when we get there, we come to find out that where they had the DuPont registry display, now the auto show is set up, they're in full-blown setup mode, like everything's set of where we're supposed to be, but they didn't tell us there was a ramp to get the cars down. Now the other vehicles we brought, they were normal stuff, comparatively. We had like Range Rovers and things like that. And where the display was set up for like the Isuzu commercial trucks. And again, they had a Land Rover display. And the Viper was like the one that we're like, I don't know if it's going to fit down this ramp. So we're like, well, let's give it a shot. And so we go to get it up the ramp. And as it comes to the top of the ramp, it high sides. And with the weight of the engine, it came down the ramp and lifted the rear tires off, but ended up sliding down the ramp. So we get it down the ramp safely. We had just high-sided Hulk Hogan's Viper, and we realized, we're like, well, if it did that going down, how are we getting it back up? We get a whole weekend to think about it. So we start, we're talking to the guys. We're like, we don't, we'll have to just see what happens. So the auto show ends. It's Sunday night. Everybody's cleared out. It's probably 10 o'clock at night. It's me and the guys from the magazine were there with all of the engineers and the carpenters and stuff from the auto show. We had gotten most of the other cars out. Now we have to do the Viper. And this is like a full flight of stairs up, that they had built these ramps to get the trucks over the stairs so they didn't have to climb over the stairs. We try getting the car up the hill, and it gets to the top, and underneath the bottom of the Viper are these bolts to attach the body. And they're probably 3/4 of an inch high and at least 3/4 of an inch, well, half an inch high and 3/4 of an inch around. They're significant. And the minute it hit that peak, it hit those bolts, they hit the plywood, and the car dead stopped. Okay, so we got to back it back down. We couldn't rebuild the ramp. The angle wasn't right. They didn't have the resources at the time. We had to get these cars out that night. So we spent an hour back and forth, like, how can we get this? We can't crane it. Can we tow it? Can we put something underneath the car? One of the guys had seen a piece of plywood that had been carpeted that they had used for something. And I'm like, well, if it's going to catch, let's just put the plywood there. So we end up drilling a hole in the plywood and putting a piece of rope on it to kind of hang it on the ramp and keep it from sliding down. And where it sat, the idea was that we get up enough momentum, the Viper's going to go up the ramp, those bolts are going to hit that plywood, which is then going to just slide instead of catch, because it's going to stay on that plywood and it's going to slide and it's going to springboard. But we had to get enough momentum. Nobody wanted to do it. I was like, I'll drive. So here we have about a dozen different guys standing around. One guy's holding the rope, 50 feet back from the ramp. I get a couple of practice kind of runs to kind of get a feel for it straight. And it just got to the point where, like, hey, you just got to go for it. It's either going to work or it's not. So I kind of get up a little bit of momentum. I go to get up the ramp. Sure enough, I go to hit that plywood. The bolts catch the plywood. It continues to slide with the momentum. The back end of the car comes up over the ramp and then slams back down on the other side. And we get it up on the top of the ramp. We got it out of there. So I essentially end up, that wasn't quite Dukes of Hazzard, but I did consider that I jumped Hulk Hogan's Viper to get it out of the auto show on the ramp. The following year, we did a display at the auto show in Orange County, and I had heard rumors of this exotic cars and coffee type of a thing that was at Crystal Cove. That it was this unofficial, not promoted. And again, this is early at the internet. This wasn't, there wasn't Instagram or anything at the time. I think it was, still MySpace type era. So I was like, I got up early one morning and I was like, this is the day of the auto show. I was like, I have to go check this out because it had fallen on what was supposed to be that morning. So I drive down to this Crystal Cove I had told it was at the shopping center. And again, no promotion, no nothing. It was just these guys just show up and nobody knew about it. So I pull up in my rental car and I get there really early and there was like a Countach there and a Testarossa. I thought it was cool. And then this like 36 Packard pulls up. And then like all of these supercars start showing up and Enzos. And next thing you know, like I'm sitting in this parking lot and there's probably 50 or 60 of these, Vector W8. I mean, all of these insane cars that people you rarely see at a show, let alone driving on the road. And I'm like, it's real. Like it's true. Like, so I'm, taking all the pictures I can, disposable camera and like my, crappy cell phone pictures. And when we got back to Tampa, I was like, we really need to do this. DuPont had a huge parking lot. We end up using the parking lot across the way and we dump out all of Steve Chapman's cars, all of Tom DuPont's cars, all of us that worked at DuPont, we're like, we get to drive the cars, we get up early in the morning. And that's how we started the Cars and Coffee at DuPont. And this was like one of the first ones and it's been going on 10 plus years. I mean, probably more at this point, almost 15 years. It was amazing because they would get there, they would be there before 7. They would stay for an hour, have a coffee at the coffee place, talk cars and just the craziest collection of stuff. And then they would just leave and disappear and go on their morning, go to take their kids to soccer practice or whatever it was. But that was the one time a month they knew they got to play with their cars. They got to be out early enough in the morning to where they could still do whatever they wanted to do. And I was like, this is a great idea. We need to take this over to the East Coast. Tom thought it was as well. And it's kind of springboarded out. Now every city and some have multiple cars and coffees or cars and caffeines or whatever you want. Everybody's got a different spin on it. But yeah, it was insane. It was insane to think that, that's how it started by just, hearing a rumor.
When you get a ticket, it might look something like this, but the first thing that you need to do is take a picture of that ticket and send it to 305-305. That will get the ticket clinic on your case immediately. They've got brick and mortar offices in Georgia, Florida, and California, but they can help you find a ticket no matter where you get it in the United States by helping you find a local attorney that will do everything they can to help you avoid costly fines, insurance premium increases, points on your license, risk of suspension, even jail time. They've helped me out with this ticket and many others and a lot of my friends as well. So check them out now at the link in the description below, or again, text your ticket to 305-305 to get the ticket clinic on your case. They are the perfect partner in your fight against any speeding ticket.